I'm Bethany Anderson of Bethany Heals, and if life's been lifing lately, then you found me just in time. This is a pause, a permission slip to just be. And before we begin, let me remind you, your healing isn't on a timeline. Around here, we don't hustle our healing, we honor it. Trust that your intuition brought you here for a reason. So let's drop into our next archive episode.
Hello, loves, and welcome to archive episode number 6 here on Life.ing. I am so excited to have you here. Today is a very special episode because it's something that I've been thinking about for a while now, and I had to get this out of my brain before I lose it. And today I want to talk about devotion and capacity and what it really means to show up for ourselves in our day-to-day lives. And this all started because I was thinking about the women that I work with in my 8-week offering Elixir, where we really dive deep into some specific practices and tools throughout each week. And I always notice this fall off that happens about halfway through. And it's when we start to get distracted by our day-to-day lives and the busyness of our jobs and our friendships and our relationships, and that excitement starts to wear off, right? We're so motivated at first to start these new experiences and ritualistic practices to help us connect with ourselves. But then what happens when we start to fall back into our old ways, our old habits, our old ways of living? It's completely natural. We all do it. And I think that there is this sort of ebb and flow when it comes to devotion. But before I even get to the topic of devotion, I think that the biggest gap that I've noticed and can see with what's missing is creating the capacity and having the capacity to show up for ourselves in this intentional way. Now, I don't think that people fall off of their practices because they don't care. That's actually the complete opposite. They do care so much about wanting to have and to build this connection with themselves. They fail because their life, their nervous system is already full. There's no room to come back to the self, to return to the self, because when your nervous system is overloaded, when your attention feels so scattered and all over the place, when your life already feels so constricting, this isn't really about asking yourself to do more, like adding more to the plate. That doesn't lead to devotion. All of this excess leads to more resistance. It starts to feel like something we're forcing than something that we're willing to experience and willing to show up for. Now, capacity. What is capacity? What does this really feel like within our space, within our bodies, within our lives? Capacity is really your ability to hold presence. Okay, so it's being present without effort. That's really all that it can be. Capacity is this internal space that's within you that allows you to hold more and that allows something to land. So, for example, what does it feel like or look like when we're at capacity? It's like if you've ever tried to meditate when you're exhausted, right? You know this. You don't even have the energy to do this. I've shared this in previous episodes where there's days that I don't want to do any of this. You know, it's when you've opened your journal and just felt nothing. You're like, the words can't even come up for me. Or even let's say you've bought something like a course or a new book or anything of the sort that's meant to help you slow down, and then you've just avoided it. You're like, I don't even have the room to show up for this. We've all been there. This is when we're at our limit. This is when we're at that threshold that we aren't able to cross. And I think that we're getting this backwards because we're taught to build these habits of how we can show up for ourselves first, and then to trust ourselves later, after the fact. But this is the opposite way of doing things because capacity comes before devotion. safety, feeling safe within your body, it comes before the consistency that you can have for yourself. And having space comes before the insight. So when there's no room inside of you, even the most inspiring practices that you're excited about, that light you up, it feels like pressure. Like, I have to get this right. I have to do this. I have to do it this way. I have to make time for this. That's not the space that we want to be in when we're stepping into this phase of devotion within our life. And when we come up to this wall of resistance, I want you to know that resistance does not equal failure. And this is important because resistance doesn't mean that you're lazy. Okay, it's not like this character flaw that you have that can't be repaired or anything like this. It's usually just your body speaking to you. It's saying, I don't have the room for this yet. And that is okay, because this is our body trying to communicate with us. And now we're paying attention. Now we're listening. But a lot of the times, instead of listening, we just push harder. We try to optimize our way into being present enough to show up for ourselves. And when you're forcing consistency, it disconnects you from yourself. I think that the way that we talk about consistency is actually working against us, because we live in this culture that worships discipline, that worships structure and routines and sticking to it and sticking through it no matter what, right? But what if we can let it be more neutral and not so critical? How can we step away from the self-criticism in these times? Because I really do believe that discipline has its place. But when it comes to the inner work that we do, discipline has a tendency to replace listening, to replace those moments where we can just hear ourselves. And I think that that's because discipline is about compliance. You know, it's when we ask ourselves, like, can I make myself do this? Can I force myself to show up right now? But devotion is about relationship. It is a relationship that we have with ourselves. How do you tend and nurture and care for the relationships in your life? Think about it that way, with the people that you care for, the people that you love, right? It's a very intentional practice that you want to show up for. And so when we look at devotion as being a relationship, how do you treat the relationship with yourself? This is going to ask you, am I willing to return to myself in this moment? The same way you're willing to show up for others. Discipline is always going to rely on force. You know, it has its moment when especially we don't have the motivation or the inspiration to do certain things for ourselves. Discipline can come very handy because it's like, no, I need to get this done. This is very important to me. I will get this completed. But devotion, and what I'm talking about with capacity and this devotion to the self, it really does rely on care. You can discipline your body to show up, for example, like going to a workout. This is good for me. This is something that my body needs. But you can't discipline your nervous system into feeling safe. And this is a really important distinction, because when discipline is used without capacity, this is when it turns self-care into self-micromanagement in a way, right? So I want you to let that sink in for a moment. Where have you found in your life these moments of self-care that you can create and have for yourself turn into these micromanaging, forceful moments where it just doesn't feel good? You feel this friction and resistance show up. Devotion doesn't feel rigid. It's not supposed to. And it doesn't feel heavy or weighed down, or it doesn't even come from a space or place of guilt. Devotion feels like relief. You know, it's like choosing something because it supports you and not because you're supposed to do it. When I think about devotion in my life, I do think about the practices, the spiritual practices that I've created for myself in those moments where things might be chaotic or overwhelming in my life, but I have my salt baths that I return to. I have my altar practices that I return to. I have these moments where I step out into nature because I know that it supports the relationship with myself. And I feel like when I compare the difference between what discipline says in my life and what devotion says in my life, I feel like discipline says I should meditate every morning, when really devotion for me says I'll return when my body is ready. So it removes the guilt for those moments where I just don't feel like I have the space. And it's like, this is how I feel right now, and that is okay. It's like those instances where discipline says, damn it, I fell off again from this habit that I'm trying to build, right? It's that shame, it's that frustration. But devotion is just saying, I'm just noticing what's changing for me. And maybe this habit that I wanted to build doesn't fit my life for where it is right now, and that's okay. Discipline is saying I've failed again. But devotion, when it shows up in your life, it says I'm still in relationship with myself, and that's all that matters. Do you feel the softness with devotion compared to the rigidity and the structure of discipline? There's a time and place for both. And when I think about my clients and my students and even myself and how discipline can really be something that's costly. When discipline leads the way in your life, you start associating this inner work that you want to do with this pressure. And anything associated with pressure eventually is when you start to avoid it. And we don't want to get to that space where we are avoiding the practices that are actually there to support us within the chaos of our lives or within the busyness of our lives, within all the distractions. We want devotion because devotion is responsive. It's not reactive. And the beautiful thing about devotion is it's not perfect, because devotion, it changes with the seasons. It changes with the seasons of the life that you're in presently. It's flexible. It's fluid. Devotion, it changes with your energy, with your life. And I think that if your devotional practice can't adapt with you, it's just not going to last. We need to start tailoring our devotion to the self in a way that feels aligned and right for us. Because when I think about spirituality and devotion and the different ritual practices that we want to start to incorporate into our day-to-day lives, I think there's this big misunderstanding or misconception that it has to be something huge and over the top and extravagant. And I need to light the 500 candles, and I need to do the 50 prayers, and I need to, have the 50,000 instruments around me and all of these things. But ritual and devotion in the muggle world, in our real life, it can be simple. It can be grounded, and it can be a lot more digestible and accessible than I think what is shown today. So when we're claiming devotion back into our lives, devotion isn't going to ask you to show up in the same way every day. Like, let's just be real. That's just how it is. But it is going to ask you to stay in relationship with it, even when things shift around you and within you. So we're reframing our relationship to devotion and to these practices that can really support us. And I'll give you some examples of different practices as well. But how can we look at this as devotion showing up differently and it's still counting for you? Where even in those moments and in those instances where sometimes it feels good to do nothing at all, right? Where pausing is a part of your devotion, where the act of returning to your practices, returning back to yourself, is the actual practice that's supporting you. So when you find yourself in those moments where you are wanting to be more intentional with how you show up for yourself in your day-to-day life, and you find yourself being really hard on yourself, like, dang it, I did it again, or dang it, I failed at this again, or why is it so hard for me to be consistent? I want you to consider this. What if the issue isn't about the discipline? What if it's that you were just trying to force the act of devotion without feeling safe or spacious enough first? Because devotion isn't something that you earn through discipline. It's something that grows when you feel supported enough to return to yourself. And when devotion leads, that is when consistency becomes natural for you. And I'm speaking from 10 plus years of being in this work of intuitive energy healing and working with clients and working on myself. This is something that builds over time, and it's something that we have to be patient with ourselves with, and we have to give grace to ourselves for. So what actually builds capacity in our lives, that builds the room and the space to show up for ourselves? Capacity isn't going to be adding more practices to your plate. If anything, it's going to be about simplifying and being really selective about the practices that feel good for you. It's built by removing the friction and the force and the effort. So, for example, it's created when you unsubscribe from one thing that just doesn't resonate for you anymore, whether it's a social media account or a newsletter or someone that you follow or whatever it may be. I feel like when you're creating capacity, it's when you leave a little bit of space between your commitments. So you've made plans with a friend or with a loved one or with your partner, you have a meeting, and let's say in your day-to-day life, you have back-to-back meetings, but you block a 5-minute window in between your meetings where you can take a breath, drink some water, reset, come back to the self. Or let's say you get a text and you always get that urge to respond immediately. What if instead you don't respond right away? Take a beat, go for a walk, play a song, go wash some dishes, do something else, step away before you respond. Or what if you just sit with yourself instead of trying to push through? I feel like that was exactly what I did with this episode. I've been wanting to talk about this for a few weeks now. And instead of forcing myself to record it because I felt like I needed to, I took a step back. I worked out. I moved my body. I did other things that I wanted to accomplish so I could show up fully for this episode, for you, in a way that felt more clear and when I was ready. So when we're creating more capacity in our life, it's really the question of how can I let this feel more like a permission slip than just a list of tasks and things that I need to do or get done, or things that I feel like I'm supposed to be doing. Because when we start to show up for ourselves in this way and in these smaller moments throughout our daily lives, this is when your capacity actually starts to increase. And this is when devotion actually starts to feel like relief, where it's something that you're excited to do. Because you don't have to convince yourself to return to yourself when there's actually room to do it. You want to be able to show up for yourself without burning yourself out, without trying to be present. Because when you have that capacity, it changes how you listen to others, how you listen to yourself. It changes how you choose, how you discern in your life, and it changes how you respond to the experiences that show up for yourself in your day-to-day life. So if you've been feeling stuck lately, I don't want you to ask yourself, what am I doing wrong? If anything, this is the invitation to ask yourself, do I have the capacity for this right now? And what would actually feel best for me in this moment? And I'm so excited because having been thinking about this over some time now, I've been working on this new offering. I'm so excited. I'm not going to say anything about it yet, but what I will share is that this is going to be a very special intentional offering where we can learn how to create the capacity to have a devotional spiritual practice for ourselves in a way that feels authentic and true to you. Where it's not a freaking template that you have to do this, and this, and it's a whole checklist and an annoying course that you just know you're not going to finish. It's something that you can actually tailor to yourself and what lights you up and actually helps you build a consistent devotional practice for yourself. Something that actually sticks this time around. And so stay tuned. If you're not subscribed to my newsletter, The Devotion, the link is in my show notes below. Every month, I provide you intuitive guidance for your month ahead, but subscribe there because that is where I'm dropping all of the details for this upcoming offering pretty soon before I leave to my residency. And I'm just so excited to be able to create a space like this for us where we can start to just live differently and to do things differently in a way that just feels right for you as an individual and not just kind of grouped into this umbrella of how we need to show up for ourselves and our spiritual practices, because it does look different for everyone. I'm so excited because the next couple of episodes we have are from some very special guests. One of our guests has created an amazing platform for you to show up for yourself with some beautiful devotional spiritual practices in a way that's accessible and at your own pace. And the other one is my dear friend who is actually returning from the same residency that I am leaving to in a few weeks. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, I would love to hear in the comments what has felt for you very restricting, or where you felt like there's a lot of effort in your practice with devotion. Where do you feel stuck? Let's talk about it. And what are some ways that you can give yourself room to show up for yourself fully in a way that takes off the pressure? So in the meantime, please follow, like, subscribe to Life Be Lifing. I love to hear and see all of you that are listening and what resonates for you. And I will catch you in our very special guest episode that's coming up next week.